Hi, this is Remembering the Past, the show where we talk about people who've died recently who've had a profound effect on our history, our society, or our culture. Tonight we're going to start out in my hometown of Chicago, and we're going to discuss the golden age of Chicago sports. Now, the Blackhawks have had a lot of success recently. They've won 3 Stanley Cups in the last 6 years, and in the 1990s, the Chicago Bulls won 6 NBA titles. But as I wrote in a Tribune article, the golden age of Chicago sports was really between 1958 and 1964, an era that was characterized by some great teams and some great players, and we're going to talk about 2 of them tonight. By way of preface, let me just read a little bit from that article, which discusses 2 of the great teams from that era, the 1959 Chicago White Sox and the 1963 Chicago Bears. On the south side, the Go-Go White Sox broke the New York Yankees' American League stranglehold once in 1959. Led by future Hall of Famers Luis Aparicio and Nellie Fox, the Sox won the American League pennant, their first since 1919. The Chicago Fire Department commissioner celebrated the win by activating the city's air raid sirens for 5 minutes. At a time when the Soviet nuclear threat to America was ever present, the sirens' wailing terrified all Chicagoans. Mayor Richard J. Daley reassured everyone that it was all in accordance with a city council proclamation that there shall be whistles and sirens blowing, and there shall be great happiness when the White Sox win the pennant. In football, George Halas coached his last NFL championship team in 1963. In a time before the Bears played at Soldier Field, they defeated the New York Giants on a frigid December day at Wrigley Field with a ferocious defense and an offense featuring a young tight end, Mike Ditka. Well, we had prominent players from both of those 2 teams die recently, and we're going to start out with the Go-Go White Sox of 1959. Their star pitcher, Billy Pierce, probably the best left-hander in White Sox history, died recently at the age of 88. Here's a report from the Chicago Tribune and Rick Cogan on the Go-Go White Sox of 1959. It was done in 2004, the year before the White Sox won their first World Series in almost 100 years. It starts out with Billy Pierce reminiscing.
We had, I would say, on the south side of Chicago, some of the greatest fans baseball's ever known. And they weren't just, what do you call it? They weren't just front-running fans, as we call it. They were fans of the fellas that hustled. And we had a good, hustling, young ball team.
In 1948, the White Sox were going through a down period. They'd spent most of the 20s, 30s, and 40s in the second division, despite some star players like pitcher Ted Lyons and shortstop Lou Gehrig. But by the end of 48, there were changes being made in the front office. Trader Frank Lane was the new general manager for the team, while Charles Comiskey's grandson Chuck was the new Sox vice president. Together, they ushered in the Go-Go Sox era with great players like Minnie Minoso, Nellie Fox, Louis Aparicio, and star pitcher Billy Pierce, a slight lefty who won 20 games in 1956 and 1957 with a new pitch.
Well, I would say the way I see the ball move, it's like a cut fastball. I would throw it with across seam and throw it as hard as I could throw it, but when I release it, I would twist my hand and the ball would come out like this, the spiral of a football or a bullet, and it would only break maybe 6 inches or 8 inches, and that was all. And it would give a different thing. The batter would hit on top of it, or sometimes he'd miss it, or he'd break his bat,
The Go-Go Sox had an amazing run of 17 straight consecutive winning seasons from 1951 to 1967, and they're the last Chicago team to make it to the World Series, playing the LA Dodgers in 1959. They lost that series 4-2, but the city loved the team, even setting off sirens to celebrate their clinching the American League pennant.
And coming back to Chicago at about 2 o'clock in the morning with thousands of fans at Midway Airport. I remember Earl Torgerson and I got into a cab. We're driving down Garfield Boulevard. There's some flares on the lawn. People were out, and that was 2 o'clock in the morning. It was very exciting, very thrilling.
Pierce still lives in the area, in Lamont.
I guess maybe I'm out of baseball so long now, I'm a fan. And I'm a fan of the White Sox.
Well, Billy Pierce was from Detroit, and he broke in with the Tigers during the war. He was actually on their 1945 team, which beat the Cubs in the World Series. That's where he got his first World Series ring. Jerry Reinsdorf gave him a ring when the Sox won in 2005. He was traded to the Sox in 1949, and throughout the 1950s, he was one of the top pitchers in baseball. Probably the best left-hander in the American League next to Whitey Ford. He was a 7-time All-Star. He pitched a couple of one-hitters, and he came within one out of a perfect game in 1958 when a pinch hitter hit a curveball down the line for a double and broke up his perfect game with 2 outs in the 9th inning. He won over 200 games and would have done better, except that Al Lopez, the manager, seemed to always put him against the Yankees, and even though he generally pitched well against the Yankees, they had superior hitting, and he usually lost a lot of close games to him, often to Whitey Ford. In August of 1959, he pitched 16 innings in a 1-1 tie against the Baltimore Orioles. And my producer Sid Tepps figures that he pitched at least 250 pitches, and he was never the same pitcher after that. It's the kind of thing you would never see today. Pitched more than twice, probably 3 times as many pitches as they would allow a starting pitcher to pitch today. And his career tailed off after that. He was traded to the Giants, had a couple of good seasons, but nothing like he had been in the American League with the Sox. Here are some of Billy Pierce's thoughts on not being in the Hall of Fame.
Things have been great for me the last few years, getting a statue out there at the ballpark and everything like that. And to be truthful, when I was playing ball, people didn't talk about the Hall of Fame as much as they do now. The only thing we talked about basically the Hall of Fame was Babe Ruth, Lou Gehrig, players like this. And nowadays, I think a fella can play 1 year and they start saying, boy, he's going to be Hall of Fame material. It changes. But my situation, who knows? You never know. I mean, we won a few ball games and had a great time. I mean, I enjoyed it very much. It was a wonderful 20 years that I put in.
On meeting Babe Ruth.
It was a tremendous thrill. I mean, I was 17 years old in the Esquire All-American Boys game, and he was at a radio show, and I met him there. And then I joined Detroit the next year, and met him in the dugout, and he was starting to rasp a little bit, and then the next year he passed away. But to meet somebody like that, and at the same time in that one game, that kid's game, I met Mel Ott, Carl Hubble, and Connie Mack. I mean, there's some pretty good names, too.
On the 1950s Yankees.
Well, there was a team called the New York Yankees at that time, and they were a tremendous ball club. And you look through most of the years when we had good, from 51 on, our team was a pretty good team at the White Sox. And but who was winning all the pennants were the Yankees. The Yankees won every year except 1 year Cleveland won it, 1 year we did. When they had Maris, Mantle, Berra, I mean, they had a pretty fair lineup over there. There's no doubt about that.
On his time with the Giants in the famous 1962 World Series 7th game.
Marichal and Perry were kind of semi-rookies, especially Perry. But we also had Jack Sanford won 20-some games that year. Billy O'Dell won 19 games that year. I mean, we had a pretty fair pitching staff, I'll tell you. We just lost out, as you probably know in the records, in the 7th game of the World Series. McCovey hit a line drive with 2 on that we could have won it. But that's, as we always say in baseball, one of the greatest pitches in baseball is the atom ball, the ball that's hit atom. If you don't have that, you're in trouble.
The best hitter he ever faced?
Ted Williams. Ted Williams is the greatest hitter that I think you could talk to almost anybody that played ball through the 40s, 50s, and part of the 60s, and they'll all say Ted Williams is the greatest hitter. With no question, Mantle was a very good hitter, but not in Williams' class as far as the hitter.
Best all-around player he saw?
Willie Mays. Willie Mays could do everything. He could run, he could throw, he could catch the ball anywhere in the outfield, and he could hit home runs, and he hit for a decent average. He to me, I mean, there's many great ball players, but all around, from what I've seen in my day, Willie Mays.
And the way the game has changed.
It's so different. I mean, we were only allowed to sign 1 year contracts. There's no question about that. There were no bonuses could be written into the contract. And it was just the way it was, and there was no such thing as free agency. When I signed, I know when I was 17, and I was 37 when I quit, and 6 months later, I got my official release. But that was 20 years taken up there that you had no choice on what ball club you were going to be with if you were traded or wherever you went.
We're going to move on to another great player from a legendary Chicago team, Mike Pyle, who died recently at the age of 76, and he was the center on the 1963 World Champion Chicago Bears. Came from Iowa, but he grew up in Winnetka, only about 3 miles from where this podcast is coming from. He went to New Trier High School and then on to Yale, where he was the captain of a 9-0 team his senior year. from a Yale film clip, the last undefeated untied Yale team.
And Captain Mike Pyle, a 230-pound tackle. All Ivy, all New England, all East. Here in white on defense, Mike smashes through the right side of the Harvard line to force a fumble and make the recovery. Just a one-man gang.
And he went on to be an All-Pro in 1963 when the Bears won the championship. Here he talks about it.
I was fortunate enough when I was younger to be a member of the Chicago Bears and be captain of a world championship team.
The Bears won the championship 14-10 over the New York Giants in Wrigley Field in December 1963. Both Bear touchdowns that day were a result of quarterback sneaks by quarterback Billy Wade right through holes Mike Pyle created in the Giants' defensive line. The irony is that Mike Pyle was a brilliant, articulate guy, one of the smartest guys in the NFL, and he died of dementia, which may have been a result of playing almost every game for the Bears in the trenches for nearly 10 years. Well, we're going to move out of sports and on to Vic Firth, who died recently at the age of 85. He was the percussionist for the Boston Symphony Orchestra, and he went on to become the world's most prolific maker of drumsticks. Here's a report on him from the Vic Firth Company website.
The definition of the American dream can be summed up in 2 words: Vic Firth. Considered to be one of the greatest timpanists ever, Vic Firth, the man, served 50 years as the principal timpanist for the Boston Symphony. In addition, his reputation as a high-class educator was solidified while serving as head of the percussion department at the New England Conservatory of Music and Tanglewood Music Center. For most, having accomplished 2 distinguished careers in one lifetime would have been more than enough. For Vic, however, out of these 2 successes, a third would emerge. In 1963, his need and desire to find the right sticks and mallets to perform with resulted in the spark that would grow into the world's largest drumstick company today. Some call it fate. Others claim luck. But if you ask Vic, he'll tell you that the harder he worked, the luckier he became.
Music, whether performing, teaching, or simply listening, has been one of the highlights of my life. Creating the perfect sticks and mallets has also been a great challenge and a great adventure. I wouldn't have missed it for the world.
At Vic Firth, we believe a drumstick is not just 2 pieces of wood used to hit instruments with. They are fine instruments in and of themselves, designed to help extend the percussionist's hands and fill the gap between musician and instrument. The world of Vic Firth. A world that specializes and takes great pride in creating the perfect pair for every musical need.
When I got into making drumsticks and looked around and saw what was available, I felt that I could greatly improve on the products that were available for drummers to play. That was the beginning concept and the motivation to start making sticks for myself. I've always been a dreamer for perfection in anything I ever did, whether it's play music, ski, hunt, fish, whatever. There was a deep passion for success and achievement.
Well, we're going to close tonight with 2 people who are associated with 2 of the most familiar songs of the 20th century. The first is Lynn Anderson, who died recently at the age of 67. In 1970, she recorded a Joe South tune. We've done Joe South's podcast. She won a Grammy, and the Country Music Association named her Female Vocalist of the Year. The song was I Never Promised You a Rose Garden. I always hated this song. I felt this is where country music started going bad, but here she is being introduced by Lawrence Welk. She sang on his show for a couple of years.
We're so very proud of Lynn Anderson and her success in the country record field. Let's hear from our wonderful little country singer.
I never promised you a rose garden along with the sunshine. There's gotta be a little rain sometime. When you take, you gotta give, so live and let live or let go. Whoa, 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 I beg your pardon. I never promised you a rose garden.
Still don't like it. Well, I'm going to close on that note. I want to thank my producer and IT genius, Sid Tepps. We're going to close with Vic Alexander. He was a composer and arranger, and he died at the age of 100, and he arranged this immortal swing-era classic for Ella Fitzgerald. They don't come any better than a Tisket-A Tasket. Take it away, Ella.
A Tisket-A Tasket, a brown and yellow basket. I send a letter to my mommy. On the way I dropped it